By sunrise, my mortgage didn't change, but it felt like it had. The HOA had hiked our dues in the middle of the night and called it alignment. By sunset, I'd be elbow-deep in spreadsheets I wasn't supposed to see, and one number would make my throat go dry. The email landed at 12:07 a.m., the exact time an honest decision tries to sleep and a bad one sneaks out the back door. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. I blinked at the ceiling, the room washed blue by its glow, and told myself to ignore it. My brain, loyal only to panic, didn't listen. Subject, important. Dues, realignment. Effective. Immediately, realignment. Like someone had nudged a picture straighter on a wall instead of reaching into our pockets. I thumbed it open and read, 2. Ensure the long-term health of our community and address emergent needs, the board has approved an adjustment of monthly assessments from $265 to $369 effective next cycle. The rest was salad, reserve studies, inflation, industry standards. No vote mentioned. No meeting I could recall. Just a sentence like a stamp on the forehead. This is how it is now. I lay still, the word effective pounding in my ears. My dad used to keep a green ledger in the back room of his hardware store, a neat river of ink where every penny had a story. If you can't explain it, you don't get to keep it, he'd say, licking a finger to turn the page. The HOA's email was long on words and short on stories. By morning, our neighborhood group chat hummed like a beehive kicked once too many times. Carla, 3 doors down, texted a screenshot and a string of exclamation points. Then, I can't afford this. My mother's on a fixed income. Is this legal? Owen, who says devil's advocate the way some people say hello, chimed in. Maybe it's necessary. Prices are up. But even Owen sent a second message. Wait, can they raise it 39% without a vote? I poured coffee that tasted like pennies and opened the HOA website. Minutes, budgets, agendas. You can learn a lot from what people forget to hide. The last posted minutes were from 2 months ago. A carousel of the usual. Pool gate repairs, holiday decor guidelines, a polite debate about mailbox paint. No mention of dues. Last week's agenda said executive session, which might, as well have said, secrets here. The budget was a PDF with numbers arranged like soldiers in crisp lines. Reserves underfunded, sure. Landscaping contracted up 12%. Insurance up 18%. Then a new line, a fat one, that hadn't existed last quarter. Security consulting, $96,000 annually. No breakdown, no vendor. Just a square of money sitting, like a bruise. The email from the board kept using we, as if we'd all sat around the same table. But we hadn't. I'd been at work grading lab reports on erosion while someone moved my month like a pawn across a chessboard. I walked outside, because anger needs air. The morning smelled like cut grass and old sprinkler water. The neighbor's flag hung limp as a tongue. Mrs. Patel, who lives on the corner and battles crabgrass like a general, was already in her yard. "Did you see?" she asked without hello. "My son ran the numbers. That's $488 more a year. We cut cable to save less than that." "I saw," I said, and heard the flatness of my voice. My eyes slid to the clubhouse down the block, its windows dark, the door with the keypad that felt like a dare. "We're supposed to get notice," I added, more to myself than to her, "and a vote if it's over a certain percent." Mrs. Patel's mouth pressed into a line. "They didn't ask me," she said, and went back to her hose like she could drown the problem at the roots. In my kitchen, I pulled down the binder of our governing documents, the one we were handed with. Our keys, CC&Rs, bylaws, rules, and regulations, paper that had felt theoretical until money walked off my counter. I flipped and found it. Without a vote of the membership, the board shall not increase regular assessments in any fiscal year by more than 20%. 20%. Shall. I ran my finger under it the way I run a finger under my students' best sentences. 20% wasn't 39. The board's email had a footnote I'd missed in the night's shock. Pursuant to emergency powers to address unforeseen expenses. Emergency. My jaw tightened. Emergencies are fires and floods, not quietly rebranded line items. I did what my dad would have done. I opened a fresh notebook and wrote a list like an incantation. What emergency? Where are the bids? Who is security? Consulting? Where's the reserve study? Was there a vote? Then I drafted a records request, careful and polite and sharp at the edges. Under our state law, owners have a right to inspect financial records. General ledgers, executed contracts, invoices, check registers. Our CC&Rs mirrored it like a dutiful sibling. I asked for 12 months of check registers, the current budget with vendor names, the reserve study, all executed contracts over $10,000, and minutes from any meeting where assessments were discussed. I copied the statute's language like armor. I added, please confirm a time for inspection at the management office within 5 business days as provided by law. I read it twice, then sent it to the HOA's official address and CC'd the property manager, who signs his emails warmly, even when he's being anything but. I printed a copy because paper makes things real. The house ticked around me, the fridge humming, the coffee cooling into bitterness. A text arrived from an unknown number. This is Lionel, board treasurer. Let's not turn this into a witch hunt. We can discuss. A witch hunt, I thought, and felt a small, grim smile pull my mouth. Witches hide. Numbers don't, I typed back. Happy to discuss. I've requested the financials. See you with the books. My phone buzzed again. Carla, if you're going to the office, I'm coming. Then Owen, I'm in too. And Mrs. Patel, I'll bring cookies. By the time the sun tipped past noon, I'd turned my dining table into a staging ground. Highlighters, sticky notes, a calculator, Dad's old brass letter opener balanced on the binder like a talisman. I didn't know what I was going to find. I only knew how to look. At 1:42 p.m., an email chimed from the manager. Records will be available Friday at 9 a.m., conference room B. Please limit your request to reasonable scope. Reasonable. I circled the word in my notebook until the ink pooled. If they were already narrowing the door, something on the other side didn't want to be seen. And that was the moment. Coffee gone cold, binder open, neighbors texting, a bland confirmation sitting in my inbox. When it occurred to me, you don't raise dues in the dark unless you're afraid of the light. They said the books would be open. They were, like a door on a chain, where you can see just enough to know what someone doesn't want you to. The management office looked like every waiting room I've ever sat in. Potted plant with one, determined brown leaf, a framed photograph of our community pool from a summer that seemed shinier than real life, a bowl of mints nobody wanted. Gavin, the property manager who signs emails warmly, met us with a smile that had caution. Tape around it. Conference room B, he said, gesturing us down a short hall that smelled like pine sol and toner. Per your request, we've assembled the records. Please remember, photos for personal reference only, no dissemination without board consent. State law doesn't require board consent, I said gently. I'd printed the statute and slid it into my binder's front pocket like a shield. We'll photograph what we need. His smile thinned, but he didn't argue. Of course, reasonable scope. Carla arrived with a tote bag and determination. Owen showed up in a button-down he reserves for arguments. Mrs. Patel set a foil-wrapped plate of shortbread on the table like an offering to the gods of process. A single banker's box sat in the middle, lid askew, labeled in thick black marker. Financials. On the far side, a plastic pitcher sweated onto a stack of napkins. The fluorescent lights hummed. Somewhere beyond the wall, a copier coughed. This is 12 months? I asked. It's the pertinent items, Gavin said, and used his hands like parentheses around the word. We took seats. I cracked open my binder and slid out my list. Carla and I would take the check registers and bank statements. Owen wanted contracts and minutes. Mrs. Patel, who lives for details, volunteered for invoices and the general ledger. We were not forensic accountants, but we were collectively good at reading things people hoped we wouldn't. The check registers were rubber-banded. I peeled one free and the band snapped with a sound that made me jump. Carla winced, then grinned. "Battle cry," she whispered. Line after line, landscaping, water, insurance, pool maintenance, regular beats in the song of a neighborhood, then a different rhythm, starting 3 months ago. Horizon Protective Consulting, LLC, $8,000. Next. Month Horizon Protective Consulting, LLC, $8,000. Next, the same. A metronome of money. My stomach prickled. I flipped back a month. There was another Horizon entry, $14,500, initial site assessment, rush. Beside it, $3,900, camera pilot, deposit. Found our emergency, I said, too bright, the way laughter sometimes sounds in a hospital. It has a name and a retainer. Owen looked up from the contracts binder, eyebrows climbing. Horizon Protective, got a 12-month agreement, he said, tapping a page. 8,000, monthly, signed in executive session. Scope, risk assessment, access control recommendations, patrol coordination, incident response policy. It's all very corporate. He pursed his lips. No bid tab, no RFP, no competing quotes. Is there a conflict of interest? Form? Mrs. Patel asked, half to herself, already elbow-deep in receipts. Vendors over 10,000 are supposed to file disclosures. Owen flipped to the back. Conflict disclosure, N.A., he read. Initialed by, he paused, by the board president. And who's the board president again? Carla asked, even though we all knew. I could picture her in the newsletter. Banner photo. A wide, toothy smile and an earnest quote about community. Marjorie, I said. Marjorie Brooks. Mrs. Patel made a small noise, the sound a teapot makes when it's thinking about boiling. Brooks, she repeated, eyes. Still on the ledger. I scanned the reserve study. Old numbers with new lamentations. The recommendation, dated just 8 months ago, suggested modest increases, 8 to 12% to keep pace with inflation, a plan for the pool resurfacing in 2026, the roof at the clubhouse in 2027. There was a paragraph about security, considerations. Sure, but it read like a whisper, not a siren. Nothing in it said, 39% now. Gavin hovered. As we stated in the notice, he offered, crime has been up in adjacent communities. The board felt, that's a policy argument, I said, not unkindly. We're looking for a process. He nodded, watched us like we might pocket a stapler, and retreated. Carla tugged a W-9 from a manila folder, the paper warm from the copy machine. Vendor tax form, she said. Horizon Protective Consulting. She turned it, squinted at the address. Suite 204, 118 Foxglove. Foxglove. My throat tightened. Foxglove is a loop in our community with a dozen houses and one tiny strip mall on the outside edge that never could decide what it wanted to be. Right now it is a dry cleaner, a mail center, and a chiropractic office. Suite 204 is the mail center. It's where half the board rents their P.O. boxes. That address is a mailbox shop, Owen said, voicing what I'd just heard inside my own head. People use those, Carla said. For privacy. Sure, I said, steadying myself. Let's see the signature page. The contract's last page was heavy with nouns. Wherefore, herein, term. 2 signatures sat at the bottom. On the left, Elliot C. Brooks, Principal, Horizon Protective Consulting, LLC. On the right, M. Brooks, Board President, Ridgetop Oaks. 2 Brookses facing each other across a dotted line. For a second, all the sounds of the room receded. The copier, the hum, the faint tick of the thermostat. There was only the neat loop of the B in both signatures, the way habit makes kin even when you don't want it to. Maybe it was coincidence. Brooks isn't rare. Maybe Elliot was nobody. Maybe. But I remembered a neighborhood barbecue last spring where Marjorie had introduced a man with a smile that said, "Mine." "This is Eli," she'd said, angling her body toward him in that proprietary way people do with their person. "He's in security consults." My mouth went dry the way it does before a storm. I slid the page to Carla and tapped the names with a finger that wanted to shake but didn't. "Tell me that's not what I think it is," she whispered. I didn't answer. I wrote the name in my notebook instead, Elliot C. Brooks, and circled it so hard the paper bruised. Then I underlined it once, twice, and drew a line to the number that had already started beating like a drum in my head. $8,000. Every month. For a year. Signed in secret. "Reasonable scope?" I murmured, and felt the first cold edge of certainty cut through the room. I think our scope just found us. 2 signatures sharing a last name can be coincidence, or a fuse. Once I saw the loop of that B on both sides of the contract, I couldn't unhear the hiss. We photographed everything. Carla's phone clicked like a metronome, while Owen held the pages flat, and Mrs. Patel murmured invoice numbers as if memorizing a spell. Gavin hovered in the doorway, hands tucked into his pockets, the strain of a man who's starting to suspect he's standing between a locked door and people who've found the key. "Conflict disclosures for Horizon Protective?" I asked without looking up. Gavin cleared his throat. "Those would be retained with executive session materials, which owners are entitled to review when they involve contracts and director recusal," Owen said, eyes still on the signature page. His voice was lawyer clean without being a lawyer. Gavin hesitated. "I'll need to check with counsel." "Please do," I said, and slid the W-9, the contract, and the check register line items into a neat stack to photograph again. Belt and suspenders. My dad's ledger flashed in my mind, the way he'd draw a little arrow when a number led somewhere. I drew one now in my notebook. Horizon, 8,000 month, M. Brooks signature, E. Brooks signature. We stepped into the noon glare outside conference room B like divers coming up too fast. The air felt thin. Carla shaded her eyes. "If Marjorie signed that and Elliot signed that and they're—" She swallowed. "We need proof of the relationship." Owen was already tapping his phone. "Secretary of State," he said. "Entity. Search." His thumbs moved fast, and a second later he turned the screen so we could all see. There it was. Horizon Protective Consulting, LLC. Formation date, 6 weeks ago. Registered agent, Marjorie A. Brooks. Manager, Elliot C. Brooks. Mailing address, 118 Foxglove, Suite 204. Suite 204 is the mailbox shop, Carla said. Mrs. Patel blew out a breath through pursed lips. "Registered agent Marjorie," she repeated, like tasting a word for poison. "Conflict disclosure, N.A. Of course it is." "Let's go to Foxglove," I said, surprising myself with how steady I sounded. It was less detective than geography homework. Walk to the map point and see what's there. The strip mall at Foxglove always looks like it wants to apologize for itself. Sun-faded awnings, a sandwich board for the chiropractor offering adjustments and hope. The mail center had a bell that rang when we entered, and a counter clerk who'd seen everything and decided not to care about most of it. Behind him, a wall of little brass doors with tiny keyholes. A laminated sign read, "We respect your privacy." A cat lay in a patch of sun by the copier, fat as a loaf. "Hi," I said, and put my elbows on the counter like a friendly, harmless person. "We're looking for Suite 204. The clerk nodded toward a cluster of boxes. "Down there." We walked, trying not to look like people casing tiny banks. Box 204 had a plastic tag slid into its slot. Horizon Protective C. The end of the name was cut off like a word caught in a door. "Do you know who picks up for Horizon?" Carla asked, soft. The clerk considered us, then the cat, then us again. "Tall guy," he said eventually. "Buzz cut, nice watch. Comes Fridays. Sometimes with a woman, short hair, boss energy." "Names?" Owen asked. The clerk tapped the privacy sign with one finger and then, because he was also a person, shrugged. "One of them signed as E. Brooks on a package last week." We thanked him and stepped back into the heat. The sun made everything look too sharp. "This isn't just a bad judgment call," Carla said. "This is a loop. Money from us to a company owned by them to secure us from a danger no one can point to." "And to get the money," Owen added, "they blew past a 20% cap using emergency powers in an executive session we didn't know about." His mouth went flat. "That's 3 violations before lunch." Mrs. Patel, who'd been quiet, reached into her purse and pulled out a pen she treats like a wand. "We need 3 things," she said. "A demand to cure, a petition for a special meeting, and signatures. 20% of owners can call a special meeting. We can vote to rescind the increase and suspend the contract pending an investigation. Also, a complaint to the state oversight folks," Owen said, "and the fidelity bond carrier. Self-dealing and breach can trigger notice requirements." It all felt bigger than us and exactly the right size for us at the same time. I thought of my students when a lab suddenly clicks, the way confusion crystallizes into purpose. We turned our group chat into a call-out. Carla drafted the demand to cure in a shared doc with language so crisp it cut. Rescind unauthorized increase. Disclose conflicts. Produce executive session minutes reflecting any recusals. Suspend Horizon payments. Schedule a membership. Vote. Owen added cites to the statute like steel rods. Mrs. Patel began a spreadsheet of owners on each street and who knew whom. I made a flyer, because I am a teacher and we think in handouts. Community meeting, what your dues pay for, bullet points, and a photo of a ledger line under a magnifying glass. At 3:14 p.m., my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I let it go to voicemail and listened on speaker with everyone leaning in. "This is Lionel," came the treasurer's voice, thinner without the confidence of a dais. "Let's be reasonable. The board believed it acted in the best interest of the community. Don't inflame this with speculation," I called back. "We're not speculating," I said. "We're reading what you signed. Registered agent, Marjorie. Manager, Elliot. Contract, 12 months, 8,000 monthly, no bids. Dues raised. 39% under emergency powers." A long silence. "We'll issue a statement," he said finally. "Don't circulate documents out of context." "The context," I said, "is our bank account." After we hung up, doubt slid in like fog. What if we were wrong? What if there was a fire we couldn't see? What if this got uglier than we could hold? I held Dad's letter opener in my hand, the brass warm from the sun coming through the blinds, and thought of that old green ledger, of the way he'd draw a line when something didn't add up and then follow it until it did. At dusk, we gathered in my living room with folding chairs and lemonade that tasted too sweet. Neighbors came. Carla's mother, pale and angry, Owen's partner who doesn't talk much but listens like it's a job, the perpetually skeptical guy from Birch Court who showed up with a fountain pen and unexpectedly cookies. We laid out what we'd found. People gasped in the places where you're supposed to and shook their heads in the places where only a sigh fits. By the end, 12 people had signed the petition, then 23, then 30. We were a line of ink becoming a shape. As the last neighbor left, my phone buzzed again, another unfamiliar number. I let it go to voicemail and played it, heart already climbing. "Hi," a man's voice said, low, like he didn't want to be overheard. "This is Eli. We should talk. You don't know the whole story." The message ended there. A clean cut. The room felt suddenly smaller, the air denser. Carla looked at me. Owen raised his eyebrows. Mrs. Patel's pen hovered over her pad. We had the names, Now the names had ours. When the person you're investigating asks to meet in public, you keep your back to the wall, your recorder on, and your questions sharper than your fear. We picked a booth at the coffee shop by the freeway where the security camera stares down. The pastry case like a chaperone. Eli arrived on time, the bell over the door chiming like a warning. He was exactly as I remembered him from the barbecue, tall, buzz-cut, the kind of watch that wants you to notice it. He scanned the room like a man who counts exits on instinct, then slid into the seat across from me and set his coffee down without tasting it. "Thanks for coming," he said. His voice had that controlled softness men learn when they want you, to calm down without them having to say it. "Before anything," I said, "our state allows one-party consent." I tapped my phone, screen down, recording light off but running. "I'm recording." He nodded like he'd expected it. "You think I'm the bad guy?" "I think the books say you're the guy," I said. "And the books don't usually lie." Carla sat one table over pretending to read a magazine nobody under 70 buys anymore. Owen hovered at the counter, auditioning as a man with opinions about pour-over. We weren't subtle, but fear had already rented a room in my chest, and I wanted it supervised. Eli laced his fingers. "You don't know everything," he said. 4 months ago, there was an attempted break-in at the clubhouse. Someone popped the back gate, tried the pump room. 2 weeks later, Marjorie's car got keyed, and a note showed up on her doorstep. "We know where you live." His eyes flicked to mine. "You're a teacher, right? You know the feeling of being responsible for people who think rules are suggestions," I breathed, steady. "And that justified creating a company 6 weeks ago with your partner as the registered agent," I said, keeping my tone even, "signing a 12-month contract in executive session with no bids and raising dues 39% overnight under emergency powers." He flinched, a small muscle in his jaw jumping. "We needed to move fast," he said. "The insurance renewal came in higher than expected. There were break-ins in the adjacent community." "In the adjacent community," I repeated. "Not ours." "It's a neighborhood," he said. "Lines on paper don't stop bad actors." "Lines on paper are what we live by," I said, surprising myself with the heat in it. "They're also what you signed. Did Marjorie disclose the relationship?" Eli's gaze slid to the camera above the pastry case and then back to me. "We're not married," he said. "We don't have joint assets. She told your manager she would recuse and then—" He let the sentence tail off like a kite string. "And then?" I pressed. "And then Lionel called it an operational matter and put it in executive session." He let out a breath he'd been holding for a season. "Look, Horizon isn't some shell we threw together to siphon money. I've worked in corporate security for 15 years. I know ingress, egress, I know policies, I know how fast we should do something. Turns into grief. I told Marjorie I'd help. We needed an entity to contract. She offered to be registered agent because it's fast. She knows the mail center guy. He runs filings all day. We got cameras lined up, deposits down, and a patrol schedule coordinated. With the sheriff. Then you found the contract before we could roll anything out. Before you could ask us, I said. Before you could vote. That's not rollout. That's bulldoze." He stared at his coffee like it might have an answer. "People get hurt when boards wait," he said quietly. "I've seen it. I didn't want that here." The line might have sounded noble if not. Welded to an $8,000 monthly retainer and a mailbox store suite. "What about the conflict disclosure?" I asked. "It says N.A." He looked tired for the first time, the watch at his wrist suddenly loud. "Gavin said—" He paused, picked, another verb. He suggested relationship disclosures were only needed for legal relatives. Gray area, he called it. "Gray areas are where people hide the bad decisions," I said. His eyes flicked up, surprised, and something like respect passed across his face before he caught it. "You're not wrong," he said. "But you're not entirely right either. There were threats. There was pressure. The entrance lights by Birch were out for weeks because the electrician kept pushing us for payment. Everyone yells about dues and also yells about how the pool pump sounds like a freight train. You can't fix anything without money. Then you propose an increase within the 20% cap, explain the reserve study, and you ask us, I said. You don't sneak it through at midnight and call it a realignment. He sat back, the booth groaning under his shift in weight. So what now? He asked. You call a special meeting, circulate the contract, paint us as crooks? You think the neighborhood's better when the board is burned to the ground? I think the neighborhood's better when rules mean what they say, I said. And when people who want to help don't also help themselves. He stared. Then he reached into his bag and slid a manila folder across the table. Incident reports, he said. Emails. The draft scope we actually planned to publish. It's not what you think it is. It's also not good. I didn't touch the folder right away. Why give this to me? I asked. Because you're going to get it anyway, he said. And because if I'm going to be the villain, I want the story to be correct. Also, he hesitated, the smallest pause. I care about Marjorie. She wasn't trying to steal from anybody. She thought she was protecting people. She also thought she could get away with skipping the hard part. Asking. I slid the folder into my bag. It felt heavier than paper. On the way out, Carla brushed past me and whispered, He's not going to be our friend. Owen held the door, but he just gave us our next step. We didn't talk much in the parking lot. Heat bounced off the hoods of cars and the freeway sang its long, low song. At home, I spread the documents on my table like maps. Incident reports, 2 suspicious vehicles, 1 cut padlock at the pool equipment gate, a next-door thread masquerading as evidence. Emails. We can use emergency powers if we frame it as an immediate safety need, from Lionel. Let's move on horizon now before the insurance renews, from Marjorie. Conflict form reads NA because not spouse, from Gavin. At the bottom of the stack was an invoice I hadn't expected to see. Horizon Protective, $2,750. Board Orientation and Strategy. Paid. 2 days after formation. There was a knock at my door. I looked through the peephole and saw a plain white envelope on the mat. By the time I opened the door, the porch was empty. Inside the envelope was a single printed email chain and 6 words scrawled in block letters across the top. If you want the rest, ask Cheryl. Every machine has one part that squeaks before it breaks. In our HOA, the squeak had a name written in block letters across an anonymous note. Ask Cheryl. I didn't sleep much that night. The manila folder Eli had slid across the coffee shop, table sat on my kitchen counter like a live wire, and the 6 words on that anonymous note, if you want the rest, ask Cheryl, kept clicking in my head like a metronome set too fast. At 8:02 a.m., I typed and deleted a dozen versions of the same text. Finally, I settled on plain, Hi Cheryl, it's my name, Lot. I'm reviewing documents related to the dues increase. I'd like to understand the board's process. Could we talk? 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. Then, I have class till 3. After that, the community garden. Not here. I told Carla and Owen to meet me at the raised beds behind the clubhouse where tomatoes are trained up twine and gossip moves in whispers. The sky had that determined late afternoon blue that makes everything look sharper. Sprinklers had left diamonds on the leaves. A bee wandered the basil like it had all day. Cheryl stood by the compost bin, visor low, sunglasses big. I'd always thought of her as the quiet one at board meetings, the secretary with tidy minutes and a cardigan that said, let's keep it civil. Up close, she looked like someone who knew exactly how much things weighed. She handed me a mesh produce bag, as if this were a normal exchange of zucchini and not a handoff of whatever this was. Walk, she said. We looped the beds once, twice. The basil smelled like summer kitchens and good news, which seemed unfair. Finally, she stopped under the shade of a crepe myrtle and exhaled like she'd been holding her breath for weeks. I didn't send the note, she said without hello, but I figured he would. Eli has a flair for drama. She glanced toward the clubhouse door, then back. You have some of it. You don't have all of it. We have enough to know the emergency was convenient, I said, keeping my voice low. Horizon formed 6 weeks ago. Marjorie as registered agent, Elliot as manager. Contract in executive session, no bids. Dues hiked 39% to pay for it. Conflict form marked NA. Cheryl's mouth flattened. Gavin told us family. Meant spouse and children. Everybody was in a hurry. Emergency powers this. Insurance renewal that. Running governance through a keyhole. She took off her sunglasses. The skin around her eyes looked tired. I voted no. My heart picked up. The minutes say unanimous. She huffed out a laugh with no humor in it. Of course they do. We didn't have a formal vote. Marjorie, and Lionel ran a walking quorum by text the night before. Consensus, they called it. I said save it for the meeting. Lionel's response was, we'll ratify an exec. Keep minutes clean. She slipped a spiral notebook out of her tote and flipped to a page where the left margin was flagged with tiny sticky notes. Her handwriting was cramped, the lines marching, disciplined. LB, use emergency powers, frame as security. MB, I'll recuse on record after. That's my shorthand. I write everything down. Did she recuse? After, Cheryl said, which is to say not at all. She spoke for the item for 12 minutes, and then, right before the vote that wasn't, said, I'll abstain on the record, and handed the gavel to Lionel. My minutes said, abstain after discussion. The version posted says, unanimous, president abstained for optics. My version never made it to the website. Her voice was steady, her hands were not. She reached into her tote again and produced a thumb drive inside a zip-top bag, like evidence. Board chat export, she said. Signal. I started keeping it when things got slippery. Do not quote me. Do not put my name on anything, but if you're going to pull the pin, you should know what explosion you're holding. Why are you giving us this? I asked. The basil and tomatoes and sun and sprinklers made everything feel domesticated and absurd. Because rules are the only way this works, she said. And because when I pushed back, I got a note under my wiper that said, secretary should stay secret. I'm tired of driving with my stomach in my throat. We sat on the garden edge while bees stitched yellow thread between blossoms, and I scrolled. The export was the missing half of a heartbeat. Marjorie, insurance up 18%. We can't wait. Horizon is ready. Lionel, owners will melt down. Call. It realignment, not increase. Gavin, I'll draft the notice. Effective next cycle. Marjorie, I'll talk to Eli. Need orientation ASAP. Lionel, we'll need proxies in case they call a special. Get our people out. Proxies? Carla said, appearing from behind the beans with her phone pressed to her chest like a talisman. Cheryl nodded once. They plan to drive. Pre-filled forms appointing Lionel as proxy holder. Door to door. The Security Now flyer says sign to show support. The fine print lets him vote their shares at any meeting. It's not illegal. She looked at me over the top of her visor. It is gross. Owen whistled low. Did management benefit? Cheryl hesitated, then nodded. Management's contract includes a 5% administrative fee on special projects. The Horizon rollout was coded as a special project. That's why Gavin was so eager. He's not the villain you think he is. He's not a hero either. I thought of my dad's green ledger. Every number with a story. Every story with a person who wants to tell it a certain way. What about the board orientation and strategy invoice? I asked. Cheryl's mouth twitched. That was Eli's idea of training the board to talk to neighbors without getting yelled at. His script included the phrases industry, standard, and adjacent crime. We paid it before there was an entity to pay it to. The ACH hit the personal account, the LLC formed 2 days later. Gavin backfilled the vendor file. She pinched the bridge of her nose. That one made me nauseous. We were quiet for a minute. The sprinklers ticked back on and hissed over the mulch. A child's laugh bubbled from the pool beyond the fence, bright and unbothered. "What do you need?" Cheryl asked finally. 20% of owners to sign the special meeting petition, I said. A freeze on Horizon payments pending that meeting, true minutes, and for you to back us from the dais. Cheryl put her sunglasses back on like armor. "I'll back the freeze," she said. "On the record, I won't be your poster. I have to live here too." She handed me the spiral notebook page she'd photocopied, her shorthand neat and uncompromising. "Bring this to Lionel. He'll know I'm done letting him keep the minutes clean. We got to work like people who have a clock running." Mrs. Patel built the street map of who would knock on which door and who might answer. Carla designed a flyer that said, "Special meeting, your vote, your dues," with the cap percentage circled in red like bad math. Owen drafted the formal demand to cure with citations that felt like steel in my hand. At 6:11 p.m., Gavin sent an email to all owners. Beware misinformation circulating in the community. The board acted within its authority. A town hall will be held Sunday to address concerns. At 6:13, my phone buzzed. A bank alert. ACH scheduled. Horizon Protective, $8,000. Processing tomorrow. I stared until the numbers blurred. Then, I picked up my dad's old brass letter opener from the counter, its weight grounding me like always, and said out loud to the empty kitchen, "Not tomorrow." We printed the petition. We laced our shoes. As the sun slid down behind the oaks, the neighborhood filled with the sound of doorbells and the hush of conversations on porches. Every signature was a small declaration. Every no was a flinch we made a note to come back to. When I got home, there was a voicemail waiting. Marjorie's voice, sweetened like tea. "We need to talk," she said. "Please don't make a spectacle. You don't know what you're risking." I set my phone face down and looked at the thumb drive glowing faintly on the table like a tiny lighthouse. The binders, the notes, the signatures. The ACH timer ticking. The feeling in my chest wasn't anger anymore. It was something steadier, colder. A line on a ledger I intended to balance. We were going to need a room big enough for all of it. We were going to need Sunday. Money moves quietly until you make it speak. We had one night to force a sentence out of $8,000 about to walk out the door at 9 a.m. Sunday evening. The clubhouse looked like someone had dared it to hold all our breath at once. Folding chairs multiplied. People stood along the walls, fans in hand, the air full of chlorine and lemon cleaner, and that strange electricity crowds get when they've decided to be more than rows of chairs. The petition sat on a card table by the door, thick with ink. We had the threshold, 20%, and then some. Along the front, a long table, name placards, water cups, a gavel trying to look important. Marjorie arrived in a fitted blazer, chin high, smile lacquered. Lionel set a stack of papers on the table and kept straightening them, a tell he probably didn't know he had. Gavin hovered by the laptop like he wished it could be a force field. Cheryl took her seat slowly, spine straight, the only one who met my eyes. The murmur dimmed. Marjorie tapped the mic. "We're here to address concerns," she began, voice warm like a sales pitch. "We understand change can be—" "Point of order," Cheryl said, not loud, but the room stilled as if pulled on a string. "Before public comment, I move to suspend the Horizon payments pending a membership vote and independent review, and to direct management to cancel the ACH scheduled for tomorrow." It was like someone opened a window. People exhaled. Lionel blinked. "We don't. This isn't a board meeting," he protested. "It's noticed as a town hall," Cheryl said. "But the board is here, and so is a crisis. The bylaws allow action in an emergency with a quorum present." "Which is?" someone called from the back. "3, Cheryl said calmly. "We have 5. I move." Silence balanced on a knife. Marjorie pulled a smile over her face like a dress 2 sizes too small. "Let's not be hasty," she said. "Eli, Mr. Brooks, has provided valuable guidance. Crime in adjacent communities." "Second," said a voice I hadn't expected. The other director, Russ, who'd rarely spoken above a murmur. He sat at the far end, his palms flat on the table as if steadying himself. "Second the motion." 3 sets of eyes swung to Lionel. He looked at the crowd, at the petition pile, at his papers, and somewhere in there I watched self-preservation outvote loyalty. "To stabilize," he said, as if naming it gentled it, "I'll support a temporary pause." He lifted his hand. "Aye, aye," Cheryl said and hit the gavel before anyone could backpedal. "Motion carries." Gavin fumbled for his phone like a man who'd been told to defuse something with a dinner knife. "The ACH is queued," he said. "Monday cutoff is 6 a.m. I'll email the bank now. They're not open." "Email, then call the after-hours number," Cheryl said, her voice tenderized by impatience. "Use the words stop payment and unauthorized disbursement under review." My heart beat in my throat. The room didn't cheer. We weren't at the kind of party that offers confetti. But the silence changed temperature. Less fear, more focus. "Public comment," Cheryl said, and stepped back from the mic. That small rearrangement, that a secretary would do it, not a president, mattered in a way hard to pin down and impossible to underestimate. People stood. A woman with silver hair and a new widow's posture. "My budget is a Jenga tower." You pulled 3 blocks at once. A father with a toddler on his hip. "My second job barely pays for diapers. Now you want another $60 a month?" A man from Birch who signed the Security Now proxy. "I didn't know I was giving." "You my vote." The fine print was a trick. Each voice laid a brick until there was a wall you couldn't ignore. Then it was our turn. I stepped to the mic with my notes on an index card, because that's how I know where my voice is. "We're not here to burn the board," I said. "We're here to read it." I clicked the remote, and the screen glowed with a timeline we'd made that afternoon. Midnight email, 39% jump, 20% cap in the bylaws, emergency powers, entity formation date, contract signature page, 2 Brookses, 1 on each side, W9, with a mailbox for an office, NA on conflicts. The board orientation and strategy invoice paid to a personal account before the company existed. The Signal chat excerpts, names redacted for privacy but not protection, we'll call it a realignment, we'll ratify an exec, proxies door to door. Each slide was a sentence, and together they made a story. The truth isn't always dramatic. Sometimes it's deadly boring until you read it out loud. Marjorie's smile cracked. "Context matters," she said, when it was her turn, voice a little too bright. "I was trying to protect—" "You skipped the part where—" "You ask," I said, "because I'm a teacher and sometimes you have to say the quiet part into a microphone. You skipped the vote. You called it an emergency because it was inconvenient to do it right." Eli was at the back wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. He looked like a man who believed he'd been hired to build a fence and had woken up inside a courtroom. He didn't speak. Maybe he knew better than to try to play hero in a room that had finally memorized its own rules. Owen stepped up and read our petition into the record, citations crisp as winter air. "We have the signatures required to call a special meeting," he said. "We're requesting 3 votes. Rescind the dues increase, suspend the Horizon contract pending independent counsel review, and, if necessary, remove and replace directors who violated the governing documents." The room didn't erupt. It did something better. It hummed into consensus. Cheryl watched the crowd for a long second. When she spoke, she sounded tired and certain. "Special meeting is scheduled for 2 weeks from Tuesday, 7 p.m. Notices will go out tomorrow. We'll engage independent counsel. We'll release executive session minutes relevant to the contract with redactions for privacy, not for embarrassment." Marjorie's knuckles had gone white around her pen. She leaned into the mic. I recuse from all Horizon matters, she said. And then, quietly, like a person finding the one honorable door left to her, I resign as president. Her eyes slid to Eli and then away. For the good of the community, she stood. The chair legs made a sound like a long sigh. She left without looking back. We didn't clap. It wasn't that kind of victory. The room emptied slowly, groups forming and dissolving like weather. At the back, Lionel took the petition from Owen like a man being handed his own reflection. "We'll do the audit," he said. "We'll roll the dues back until there's a vote." He sounded like someone who had discovered the weight of the gavel by dropping it on his foot. Outside, the air was cooler than it had any right to be in our city in summer. I stood under the oaks and let my shoulders drop. Cheryl joined me, hands shoved into the pockets of a cardigan I'd never noticed. Was frayed at the cuff. "The bank sent a receipt," she said, holding up her phone. "Stop payment accepted." Relief is a physical thing. It loosened my jaw, my shoulders, the fist around my heart. Across the parking lot, Mrs. Patel was handing shortbread to strangers. Like communion. Carla cried into Owen's shirt and then laughed and cried again. At home, I set Dad's brass letter opener on the notebook and wrote the last line on the page I'd started the morning the email came. What emergency? The answer had turned out to be a story about people and power, about fear and shortcuts and the quiet courage it takes to insist that rules are for everyone, especially the ones in charge. The special meeting would come. An audit would line item. Our mistakes in language we'd have to swallow. New elections, new policies, maybe new bruises. But when I looked around my kitchen, flyers and binders and a plate of Mrs. Patel's shortbread half-eaten, I felt the kind of tired you get from lifting something heavy and worth it. Numbers don't have voices. We do. And when we read them together, they sound a lot like home.